Absolutely. So this is a dairy in California, and so this is not the biggest dairy in the world, but it is a dairy in California. And we have been looking for some fact patterns in California to try to use a law, and the law specific to this case is California Penal Code 599A. And so, to your question, we came across this dairy, and we believe that some of the conduct committed at the dairy, specifically the confinement of dairy calves, violated the law, and that was the impetus of the case. We did an investigation, got some photos, and it kind of went from there. But to your question, yes, it's a dairy in kind of central California.
Yeah, and I obviously want to get to the details of 599A in a moment. But first, can we just have a little background? I know that Alexandra Paul, who has been on the podcast, was involved and there was an investigation. How did you find out about it and how did you pick it? And can you just kind of walk us through what she found?
Absolutely. I think I'd start with the basis that the conduct that was witnessed here was visible from the roadside. And if you, I'm not from California, Jessica is, and feel free to chime in, but if you drive around California, it's not difficult to find agricultural operations. And so you're right, Alexandra was involved in this case. She does a lot of activism and work in California. And ultimately identified from the roadside this specific farm amongst others. This is certainly not the only one that's committing this conduct, but identified this farm and the housing in which the dairy calves were kept, which appeared to be a violation of another law, which we'll talk about. And so it wasn't identified through any magic or anything like that, other than just observing sort of typical California agricultural practices. And the conduct was witnessed from the roadside, photographed, and then specifically what was at issue was the housing in which dairy calves were kept. It was kind of these small wooden, green, sort of dilapidated looking hutches, and that the dairy calves were kept with no room for exercise. And then that led us to the legal case.
Yeah, can you go a little bit more specifically, like how I had been picturing when I read about this, these more typical white, little white, I guess, plastic hutches that you so frequently see dairy calves kept in. Sounds like these might have been about the same size, but maybe they looked a little different. And can you just talk a little bit about the size and how she knew there were actually calves in them? I have certainly seen these from roadsides in upstate New York as well.
Yeah, and so the size, I think in one of our complaints, we had, just as a matter of comparison, sort of an aerial image of the property comparing the crates to a pickup truck, and they were actually looking smaller than the pickup truck. So you're talking, 20, 30 square feet of space. And the hutches that you're referring to, most people have probably seen. They're kind of the plastic, people might have seen the igloo type dog houses. Imagine these for dairy calves, but larger. Well, this is about the same size, but constructed of a different material. I mean, here we're talking wood, sort of planks that are nailed together with a metal roof. And then to your question on how the cows were viewed, the pictures that we obtained show the cows basically through the slats in the wood. You can see either ears or a calf kind of peeking over, or you can see legs, and you can clearly see that many of these were occupied.
And I assume that during the time she watched, she didn't see the calves ever getting out or doing anything.
That's correct. And I think one key point, and this was a bit of an issue at the trial court, was that this wasn't just a quick drive by, here's a picture, we have no idea what's going on. This was over the course of 3 days documenting this, sometimes for an hour at a time or more than an hour at a time. And to your question, Marianne, there was never any opportunity where the calves were let out and they romped around a pasture. In fact, there didn't even appear to be a fence where they could go out. They were confined to these specific dairy hutches. And also, it's in the complaint, but even during a phone call, someone at the farm represented that these calves stay in here for months at a time. So it wasn't just a tidbit of evidence. This was over 3 days, over many hours, plus a phone call. I think it's very evident that these calves are not being let out, not getting exercise.
So, probably a lot of people listening to this know about this kind of treatment of dairy calves, but you also do go through a lot of information in your complaint about why this is so bad. I mean, it may seem obvious that it's so bad, but can you kind of like summarize why this is so bad?
Sure. Yeah, we cited a lot of evidence, and it is not, hey, animal rights websites, people saying dairy calves should run around. There's a lot of scientific studies cited in our complaint that speak to the value of exercise for animals, how they walk when they're deprived of exercise, how it's a little more difficult for them to walk, the value of socialization, and all of these things speak to the benefits of not keeping dairy calves confined. I realize the dairy industry has its own reasons for why it says these animals should be confined, but there is a wealth of evidence out there that says, these are animals that they want to play and they want to socialize. And I think anyone who's ever been to a sanctuary or seen a dairy calf, I mean, we live where I'm sitting now next to 27 acres and our neighbor grazes cattle. And I look out my window all day and watch calves romping around on the fields. They're not just standing there saying, I wish I were confined to a 24 square foot space. They want to play, they want to socialize. And that's not just me saying that. There are, major agriculture universities. We've cited their studies and authorities in the complaint.
Yeah, did you also point out at all, or maybe it wasn't relevant to this particular lawsuit, but just the relationship between the mother cow and the calf? It just always just seems such an act of cruelty to interrupt that. But I guess you were focused mostly on space here.
We were, yes, I agree wholeheartedly, but specific to our complaint, that wasn't a point that we referenced.